Hello! Today's video is about Harem Sign Language. It's cool because Harem Sign Language wasn't just a basic communication strategy for deaf people only. No, it became a tool of power. So first, what does harem mean? So back in the Ottoman Empire, which is modern-day Turkey and the surrounding areas, the Sultan, who was the ruler of the empire, had many, many women, wives, concubines, consorts, and he kept them in what was called a harem. And that was a home, a room, a palace where they lived, in essence, the rest of their lives. And one sultan could have tons of different women, hundreds. And then there was typically one woman that oversaw the harem. And outsiders were not allowed to go inside. Only the most loyal and trusted servants were able to go inside the harem. Who were the dilsiz? So the deaf servants were called dilsiz, and they began serving the Sultan in around the 15th century. So the Ottoman Empire, they prioritized first and foremost silence. Speaking was forbidden, especially in front of the Sultan or the head woman in the harem. It was forbidden to speak. It was to show respect, yes, but really that was a means of control on the part of the Sultan. So that environment required nonverbal communication, and typically that was a lot of glances or basic gestures. But that gesturing over time, through many years, hundreds of years, became Harem Sign Language. And that is what we now call Seraglio Sign Language. So in the palace and the surrounding areas, many knew a few signs so they could communicate with the deaf servants. But in the harem, that was the main means of communication. It was signing. So in the year 1717, a British woman was able to visit and actually able to go into the harem. And she recognized that all the women were just signing like crazy. They spoke very little, but they would sign and gesture with each other. The women spoke little and expressed much by sign. So in that strict environment, if you knew sign language, you had power. Where were the dilsiz from? So where were the deaf servants from? Well, some were slaves brought into the empire, brought to the palace. Some were captives from war and brought again to the palace. And some, according to European recorders, and maybe it's wrong, but they said, the Sultan sometimes would cut off the tongue of someone so they couldn't speak. Modern day historians say that probably didn't happen, or rarely, but it could have happened. It could have been that not all the servants were deaf, but they just were mute. They couldn't speak. In essence, dilsiz, the word, means the mute ones. So it could mean that it wasn't just deaf servants. But the sultans, they preferred deaf servants. Why? Well, if they had a private or confidential conversation, they knew that their deaf servants weren't standing there overhearing everything. What were the dilsiz roles? So the deaf servants, their roles and responsibilities varied. There were many. So one was that they served food, cleaned, did the laundry, that kind of thing for the harem. Second, they were messengers. And so private communications they would pass to people outside of the harem. Third, some were guards. They protected the harem. They would stand outside and guard the harem. And some, and this is really interesting, some were killers, meaning they were executioners. So a sultan liked to ask a deaf person to go kill someone. Why? Because there was no announcement. There was no warning ahead of time. They weren't gossiping and telling people. It would just happen out of nowhere. And they had a phrase for it. It was called death without a word. Ooh. So typically it happened through strangulation. Yeah, like this. So, of the 4 roles, which do you prefer? Was this a full sign language? So one time They had up to 100 deaf servants in the palace. So yes, that was enough to develop and create a complete sign language. However, most historians say that it probably wasn't a full quote-unquote sign language, but more of a sign system, meaning a way to communicate for work and for basic communication. But maybe they did have a full sign language. We have no idea because we have no records. It kills me. I want to see them so bad. But that sign system became standardized when, in the year 1618, there was a sultan by the name of Osman II. And he decided, so just so you know, he knew sign language. And he decided that all in the harem and palace area should know sign language. And that tradition was passed down for many generations through many sultans, and it became more standardized as a result. So the people who were signing were, yes, of course, the deaf servants, but also the sultan, his advisors, the harem overseer, the harem women inside, the slave workers who worked there. I mean, lots of people were using this sign, and some of them maybe only knew a few signs. Maybe some of them knew all of it. We don't know, but they learned how to communicate silently. And it's super cool because it wasn't just a deaf language. No, it was a language that was used for all of the harem and the surrounding environs. Is Harem Sign Language still used today? So is that sign language still in existence today? No, sadly. That sign language, the deaf servants, that continued all the way until 1922 when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and harems were closed. So Harem Sign Language might have influenced modern-day Turkish Sign Language, TID, but we don't know. And the only records are from Europe, not Turkish records. So typically it was from European travelers or politicians who visited the Ottoman Empire and recorded what their experience is, but it's still cool to read. For example, in the year 1583, a German traveler, he recorded that their souls were opened through sign. The Sultan's dilsiz opened the soul with signs that are mutually intelligible with signs. It's just such a cool quote. In the year 1604, a Venetian ambassador from Italy, he visited and he noticed, wow, they could communicate and discourse and reason together. It wasn't just basic communication. Both the Grand Signor and diverse that are about him can reason and discourse with the mutes of anything, as well and distinctly a la mutesha, by nods and signs. And in the year 1667, a man from Britain, a politician, he recognized that they could tell stories and their religious fables. They were telling stories together. They can discourse and fully express themselves, but to recount stories, understand the fables of the religion. So these travelers, we don't know if they were able to truly recognize if it was a full language, right? They didn't know sign language. But the records themselves prove that communication was possible. The Society of Silence. So it's really cool because Harem Sign Language wasn't just a means of basic communication only for the deaf. No, it became a tool of power. So remember how speaking was forbidden in front of the Sultan. And he had the power, in essence, to control speech. So if you knew how to sign, you could communicate in that silent court. So in essence, deaf servants really were important in the Ottoman Empire. They were vital for about 400 to 500 years, and they had power. They killed in the place of the Sultan. They could communicate with the women in the harem, which was absolutely illegal for other people to do. It's really interesting because that sign language was not used only by deaf. No, it was used by the Sultan and the women in the harem. They all learned to sign. So it's super fascinating, right? If you're the same as me and totally a history nerd, you should check out this video that I made recently and subscribe so I can make more of these types of videos in the future. Thank you so much. Bye. And another interesting thing, if you saw the pictures, like the paintings, the drawings that I showed throughout this video, they're from the year 1650 a man from Sweden gathered up all of these documents, the drawings from the Ottoman Empire, and compiled them into a book, and it's called the Book of Costumes. And in it, there are 2 or 3 dilsiz, servants. And it's so cool, right? Because you can see them holding up their signs. And one even looks like it's saying, I love you, which is so cool. So if you want to see more of these, you can in the Library of Congress. Yay! So I've added links below so that you can research and learn more about this fascinating sign language yourself.